Okay, so it's been 2 weeks since we were studying this life of Jacob, and last time we met, we were on chapter 26 of Genesis, and just a quick review of that. We talked about how in that particular chapter, while Jacob is really not discussed, it's sort of this continuum and this flow of teaching and consciousness from his mishpachah, from Abraham, and it discusses that like that, and it's in this chapter we see a lot of blessing. So it's one of those positive chapters in the Torah where we're doing things right and we're being blessed, and it's an instruction to us of how to do things right and what the positive consequences of doing these things right are. So we talked a little bit about honoring that continuum, which Isaac does. So that's one of the first things that he does. It's positive that we can learn from. He honors the continuum of his father, and even though the Philistines had buried up the wells that Abraham had dug, he re-drills those wells, right? And another positive that we can take from what Isaac does is he's told, don't go to Egypt. There's a famine in the land. Don't go to Egypt. And he doesn't. He goes to Gerar, and it's a borderline town of the Holy Land. And God tells him, remain an immigrant there, remain in this state of uncertainty, and don't go back to Mitzrayim or go to Mitzrayim. And what did that mean? That means simply that don't go back to narrow and rigid thinking. There's a famine in the land, you'll be blessed. Stay in this state of uncertainty and trust the divine consciousness, trust the divine spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. And he does that, and he's blessed. Another thing, and I said in our last lesson, probably 100 times, that Revka was really the hero of the chapter and of really the beginning of Jacob's life, in that she was, even though being born in the sort of what we like to call the side of severity or the left side, she, as a very young child, just her wind blew, as is so beautifully described in Shir HaShirim. The north wind blew to the south and came into the garden, right? So she became immersed in the side of Chesed and Hakmah. And the good thing about Isaac is he allowed her to draw him into that, because he was born of the left side of the side of severity. So Revka draws in Isaac, and they have a beautiful family, and the boys grow up, right? So that's another thing that he does. So all these positive things that Isaac does, you can read in the chapter, he's blessed. Even in famine, he's blessed with prosperity, and his crops and everything's going well. And it's going well because he doesn't return to narrow thinking. He allows himself to be drawn to the side of the south, and that wind of and we talked about Revka being an example of the Shekinah, which is my sister, my bride, the dwelling of the Shekinah within us and also outside of us. And she was just like that from the very time Eliezer chose her to be Isaac's wife. She was generous without being transactional. She was just purely generous. She wasn't looking for anything. She gave Eliezer the water and watered his camels, and wasn't looking to teach him a lesson he should do it himself, or had any feeling of that whatsoever. So here's an example of the flow of pure consciousness and love that comes from the garden, comes from the right side, comes from that bliss pure consciousness. And as Isaac allows himself to experience that, this is a blessing for his whole mishpacha. And that's how it shows up. And if you read chapter 26, it shows up that way. So that's the instruction. Further than that, to conclude chapter 26, we can talk a little bit more about the wells. So in the Torah and the Talmud and also the Midrash, we find that Gerah also has Gerah Valdi, which is sort of like a stream that flows from the north to the south. And that stream, so here we again have the same metaphor of the waters of consciousness. And the stream itself is something that the Kabbalists say Isaac was very connected to at that time, at this time of blessing, right? And he goes out and his servants and him drill more wells. So two things here. One is that he's connected to the stream of pure consciousness, and the other is that he not only uncovers the wells of his father to create this continuum and doesn't dishonor his father in any way, but at the same time, he's progressive in that he has new wells of his own that he's dug. So there's two things going on. We honor the past, and in all of these Kabbalistic or mystical traditions, even of the Veda, we always honor the past. And he did that, but he also went and dug new wells. So on the outside and on the inside, we have the battlefield of consciousness in our lives, right? So we have resistance to the experience and crossing the border of higher states of consciousness. So that resistance can come from the outside. And in this case, the example of that is Abimelech and the Philistines. But there is also Abimelech and the Philistines within us that creates resistance to that experience, right? And obviously, in the chapter, it's discussed in the form of Mitzrayim, right? So we don't want to surrender to narrowness. We want to see the broad picture, right? And that is within us and also outside of us. So the first well that he digs, that Isaac digs on his own, he gets challenged by the Philistines. So there's a challenge. So he names the well as such, as challenge, right? So I can tell you the names of the wells are relevant to the lesson, right? So Esech is the name that he names the first well, and the name is related to disputed or challenged, right? So think of it in our path and those things that, as well drillers in our meditation practice and anything else we do to further the experience of the well of being within us, that divine consciousness, our awareness of that, everything that's good in our lives gives us more awareness of the divine within us and around us. Everything that's bad in our lives challenges that. So we ourselves often challenge that. So that's the inside of this equation. We'll say, oh, I've been meditating for months now and regularly, and I'm not seeing God, or I have some challenge of why am I sitting here for 20 minutes when I could be feeding the poor for those 20 minutes, or I could be doing something else, right? So we tend to challenge ourselves rather than surrender and trust, okay, that allows us to receive, that emptying of the cup. So we don't want to create a narrative within ourselves of challenging to ourselves. Then from the outside perspective, people will challenge you. Even friends and family who think they might be doing the thing that's good for you. You may be challenged and saying, what are you wasting your time? Amy, why are you wasting your time in your room like that? could be outside gardening, do something. Or you need to be moving more. Now, certainly our lives need to be both rest and activity, and movement is very important. But that kind of challenge, that kind of resistance can come very often and will come very often from the outside, from folks who may be our enemies, but maybe our good friends and family. So the lesson here is Isaac, in this case, did not allow himself to be stymied by that challenge. And then the next well that he dug was called Sitnah, very close to the word Satan. And that was related to accusation, right? So that challenge turns sour within us or from the outside, and it becomes sour in the form of accusation. So now we have the accuser, either from the outside or within inside, accusing us of doing the wrong thing, or of being on the wrong path, or of not doing it right, or all of those judgmental things that ultimately create klipot. So it goes back to what the Zohar says, harsh judgment. Harsh judgment leads to accusation. And that harsh judgment and that accusation and that rigidity that comes in Mitzrayim, that all creates klipot. And as I said, that's what, that klipot, that's what is bad, that we avoid, that distracts us from winning the battlefield of consciousness by continuing and not giving up. And that's exactly what Isaac did. He did not give up. He drilled yet another well, even though the Philistines disputed the first two. And the last well was not disputed. And that well he called Rechavot, which has its meaning in wide open spaces. So this is the opposite of Mitzrayim, Rechavot. It's the opposite. The wide open spaces as opposed to the narrative of narrowness. Okay, so if we look at the examples of Revka and Abraham and how they're related to the Shekinah in these situations, and if we allow ourselves to think more deeply about it, and the ideas of how Abraham was to the three angels and so loving and kind, and how Revka was to a stranger also coming and asking for water. These are non-transactional acts of love. And really, ultimately, there's only one law, right? That's the law of unity of love. And that's when our well is drilled and we've emptied our cup and allowed that water to fill our inner court. So in this 26th chapter, Isaac names this place Beersheba, which is the seven wells, right, in translation. And this, we know that in the inner court is the seven doors of the seven doubles, the seven gates, the seven wells. There's one well, but there are mouths to the well where you push the rock away. And those letter energies, right? What? Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pei, Resh, Tav. They're all energies of the emotions of our inner court and the battlefield of consciousness, life and death, peace and war, blessing and a curse. Now, blessing and a curse is what we're really talking about when we started talking about it from the beginning of this series, which is we can choose to be a blessing to ourselves and all of around us and the entire universe, or we can choose to be a curse. And if we allow ourselves to be stuck on the side of judgment and severity and not allow that to serve kindness and wisdom, then we become a curse and our actions become a curse. But when that love flows, that pure consciousness flows from that well, then the well streams of love and life flow, and mercy and kindness flow, just the way they did in these examples of Revka and also Isaac, because Isaac was joined in that way. And then all of the blessings came. And the final blessing was maybe perhaps the most interesting one. And that is at the end of the chapter, Abimelech comes to Isaac and says, you know what? Isaac says, why are you coming to me? You hate me. Because he was an accuser of Isaac. So he says, I see God is working in you. So what happens when we do those things that allow us to be like Revka and Abraham is that consciousness opens up. This is called the ripple effect, right, Alice? That consciousness opens up through the ripple effect, the consciousness of other people. And I've talked about this before. In the Veda, in TM land, they call it the Maharishi effect, where groups of people come together to meditate, and that meditation opens up the consciousness of people around them. Isaac didn't preach about anything to Abimelech, but his experience, he saw, wow, look what's happening over there. Look what's happening with Isaac and Revka, and they're twins. This beautiful blessing is happening. He saw that, and guess what? They made a treaty and they made peace. Now, to be clear, Abimelech always had that, his feet firmly planted in severity, and his treaties were very transactional, not like Revka or Abraham. But nonetheless, because of the faithfulness of Revka and Isaac and Jacob and Esau and the servants, redigging the wells, even though they were being accused by Abimelech and the Philistines, because of their faithfulness to that, they didn't get distracted. They didn't trust in chariots of war. They continued to drill. And that created the shalom. So we can't get distracted. That's the instruction to us. We continue to drill. We continue to allow our severity to serve our wisdom and kindness. So that's all the success of chapter 26. Then we'll see as we go into chapter 27, you can then stop and your eyes can be covered. And this happened to Isaac. And then we'll see what goes from there, right? So that's it for today. Does anybody have any questions or further thoughts on that? I think you have to unmute yourself. Oh, maybe not. Go ahead.
Did you say that that severity served their wisdom? Is that what you said?
Yes. So severity becomes so this is a wholeness thing. It's about wholeness and equilibrium, right? So the wholeness in here is that it's not that there isn't any severity, right? But the severity serves. So the wind of the Shekinah, if it's standing on the left side of severity, the wind blows to the north. I mean, to the south. Standing on the north side, the wind blows to, sorry if I confused that, but I've said it enough that you really know it. So I mess it up. So what? The wind blows from the north to the south into the garden in Sher HaShonim, the Shekinah, the wind of the Shekinah. So what I'm saying is the strength and the severity, the Gevorah serves Chesed. Binah, which is intellect and understanding, serves Chachmah, the experience that is wisdom. Binah and Gevorah can never draw in Chachmah and Chesed. It's always the other way. This is why Jacob could not allow Esau to have the birthright. Because at that time, the ceremonial sacrifices were a blessing, not a curse. Only if they come from the side of Chachmah and Chesed. And think of that in real terms. If you're a very severe, bloodthirsty person, and you're doing the sacrifice of blessing, you're bringing a curse. Doesn't matter if you do the ceremony perfectly. Just read Isaiah. You can do the sacrificial ceremony perfectly, but if in fact you're a severe person and you're not of the nature now of Rivka and Abraham, the ceremony is a curse. It's not a blessing. But if you're of the nature of Abraham and Rivka, and you do, and Jacob ultimately, you do that ceremony, that's a ceremony of loving kindness. Your strength serves it. Okay, well, here's an example. If someone is harming someone that you know, let's say there's a guy who's breaking into your neighbor's house daily and beating up his family, okay? It would be a severe gesture to go and take that guy and throw him into jail. That's severe, right? No. Yeah. That's severity serving mercy. Why? Because you have empathy and loving kindness for your neighbor. You could take an extreme judgmental, severe position and say, I'm not only going to throw him in jail, I'm going after his parents, his brothers and sisters. That's not what we're talking about. Okay? The curse that so going back to Shechem, which is another story, right? And the people of Shechem, the prince of Shechem, took the only daughter of Jacob and raped her and kept her as a hostage. But then two of the boys decided that they were going to take vengeance on Shechem, and they overdid it. And to Jacob's dying day, he said that was a curse on the Mishpah. Now, had they just gone and freed their sister and made punishment on the prince, that would be a different story. They killed everyone in Shechem. So that's not severity serving mercy and love and kindness. See, when the rubber meets the road, you know what you know. Because when you serve out severity, it's a reluctant serving. Does that make sense? I hope that helps. And I would like to discuss it further if anybody has any other thoughts.
Bob, can I just offer that the word gevurah we often translate as severity, but also has the connotation of discipline in the sense of self-discipline. And I think that's sometimes a useful frame for thinking of the way in which gevurah can help us. It can be in service to other attributes. And you could think of, in a very basic sense, how you might experience loving kindness, chesed, this feeling of overflowing, abundant love, but without some sort of structure or outlet that takes shape through self-discipline, then that is really not useful. And so in that way, discipline and what you might consider severity is really useful in sort of shaping the experiences that we have of unending love. So I think self-discipline is another way of viewing it.
I love that. Thank you so much for adding that. That's great. We should keep that in the recording piece, Ruth. I agree 100%. That's another prism from which to experience Gevurah, a very important one, as a matter of fact.